Mr Deputy President, Mr Deputy President, I move according to sessional order that it be instruction to the Committee of the Whole that they have power to consider amendments to definitions in the Gas and Electricity Consumer Safety Act 2017.
You want to speak to that? No? Are you seeking to speak to it, or you want to go I'll just vote to it?
Sorry?
Do you want to speak to that?
No.
No, okay. Okay, fine. No other speakers? On that one? Yes.
Yep.
This is identical to Mr Shoebridge's sheet I've got as well. Just so you know,
we
Kate.
haven't come to that. We haven't come to haven't come to the amendment yet.
Yeah.
No. This is the.
This is the identical referral though to the committee. Yes. Yeah, I know. Okay. So the motion is as moved by Mr Borzak. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Okay. That's instruction to committee. So thank you, Mr Borzak. That's all you have to say.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President.
You can do it.
Yeah. Okay. So,
you right?
yeah. No, you need to resume your seat. So, Mr. Buttigieg.
Are you not in there?
No.
I thought we were going to go straight into it. Okay.
Yeah.
Mr President, I move according to sessional order that it be an instruction to the Committee of the Whole that they have power to consider amendments to the Home Building Act 1989 relating to unqualified or licensed mechanical services and medical gas work, unqualified or licensed medical gas fitting work, and unqualified or licensed medical gas technician work.
You don't wish to speak to that instruction?
No.
Okay. So the motion is moved by Mr. Buttigieg to instruct the Committee of the Whole. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. The ayes have it. The Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you. I move that you do now leave the chair and the House resolve itself into Committee of the Whole to consider the bill in detail.
Oh, there it is. The motion is that moved by the Parliamentary Secretary. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it.
No, it's about to start.
I was glad to be here to witness all that.
It's a
privilege. It was special.
It's special.
Natasha, are there any more divisions? We haven't got any more. Nothing contentious. We want to agree on anything. Okay, there's no amendments on that. There's no amendments at all, is there? Yeah, I don't think there's anything that's wrong with it.
I don't think there's no amendments. Stronger communities. No. Oh, he'll be exhausted. Can't see why.
The Health Legislation Miscellaneous Amendments Bill 2020 is leave granted to take the bill as a whole. Yes. There being no objection, I'll proceed accordingly. I have three sets of amendments. In no particular order. Greens amendments appearing on sheet C 2020-179B. Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party amendments appearing on sheet C 2020-183B, and opposition amendments appearing on sheet C 2020-182C. Now I think I'll put the opposition amendments aside at this stage because I think they basically deal with different parts, but might have to have a closer look at that. The Greens amendments deal with yeah.
I can indicate that given the shooters amendments cover what our amendments do, we won't be present.
Right, that's great. That sorts out a problem for me you wouldn't believe. So. I'll therefore call upon the Honourable Robert Borzak.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I seek leave to move amendments numbers 1 and 2 on SFF sheet C 2020-183B in globo.
Is leave granted? Yep. Leave is granted. The member may proceed and move.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Amendment number 1...
Sorry, can I ask you to, before I get into trouble from below, can you move it before you speak to it?
Jeez. What next?
Yeah, I know.
I move amendments number 1 and 2 on SFF sheet 2020-183B. Mr. Chair, Amendment number 1 simply gives effect to Amendment number 2 and is taken to have commenced on the 1st of November 2020. Mr. Chair, it was never the intention to include veterinary hospitals in the definition of medical facility in the gas legislation amendment Medical Gas Systems Act 2020, bringing veterinary hospitals within the same regime as medical facilities, including hospitals, day surgery centres and aged care facilities in relation to the regulation of the installation and maintenance of medical gases under the bill. Mr. Chair, Amendment number 2, item 1, now seeks the omission of veterinary hospitals and facilities from the definition. I'm advised that the New South Wales Government has done extensive consultation with a wide range of stakeholders, including gas fitters, industry bodies and leading consultants in the veterinary industry, and their inclusion in this legislation is not appropriate. Under the legislation, medical gas work must be done under an Australian standard AS 2896. While this is wholly appropriate for those facilities serving medical care to humans, the standard does not cover medical service gases to animals, especially horses. I'm advised that there is no appropriate Australian standard that could be prescribed to remedy this oversight. Furthermore, I've spoken to many vets since the passing of this piece of legislation, and I'm told that a majority of small veterinaries use bottled medical gases in their practices, and they would therefore not come within the legislation. I am also advised that a considerable biosecurity risk of cross-contamination would exist if veterinary hospitals were included under the legislation as it stands. This would be particularly so if the same licensee were to work on facilities in both hospitals and then in a veterinary hospital. I am further advised that by the veterinary industry that such an unnecessary regulatory burden being placed on veterinary hospitals in order to make them comply with human hospital standards, inspection and certification requirements would seriously compromise their economic viability, which could have adverse and unintended consequences on veterinary practices reverting to using bottled gas, which has inherent WHS risks and is a substandard level of care for animals. The vast majority of veterinary hospitals would not be capable of complying with the requirement for active waste anaesthetic, get it right, gas scavenging when the legislation is enacted by the 1st of November 2020. If unable to finance a retrofit within the next 3 weeks, non-compliant veterinary hospitals would be forced to close. This amendment addresses this issue by removing veterinary hospitals from the ambit of the Act to ensure that we can remove biosecurity risks as well as remove ambiguity about which standards apply. Mr. Chair, Amendment number 2, item 2, amends the definition of medical gas installation and is made in order to clarify that medical gas installation must be situated in a medical gas facility as defined in the gas legislation amended Medical Gas Systems Act 2020, which I refer to as the Amendment Act. This rectifies an omission in the Amendment Act as amended by Parliament.
Thank you. I think Parliamentary Secretary, do you want to?
The government supports this amendment. The amendment seeks to amend provisions of the Gas and Electricity Consumer Safety Act 2017 inserted by the Gas Legislation Amendment Medical Gas Systems Act 2020 in order to ensure that veterinary hospitals are not the subject of those reforms. The Gas Legislation Amendment Medical Gas Systems Act 2020 contains reforms designed to address deficiencies with the licensing regulatory system in relation to persons who carry out medical gas work. The Gas Legislation Amendment Medical Gas Systems Bill 2020, as introduced by the Minister for Better Regulation and Innovation, did not involve veterinary hospitals. They were included by Labor amendments to the bill. Concerns were raised at the time regarding the amendments during consultation with Labor. However, these concerns were ignored and the government ended up supporting amendments during the debate due to the fact it was the only means by which broader reforms could have passed the Parliament. It has since become clear that the inclusion of veterinary hospitals was not appropriate, and this is why the government supports this amendment, which removes them from the application of the Act entirely. Following the passage of the Gas Legislation Amendment Medical Gas Systems Bill 2020 through the New South Wales Parliament, the government has undertaken extensive further consultation with the veterinary sector. A series of roundtables were conducted and then further targeted consultation with veterinary and anaesthetic sectors occurred. This included consultation with advanced anaesthesia specialists, the Australian Veterinary Association and the Australian and New Zealand College of Veterinary Scientists Anaesthesia Chapter Past President. It became abundantly clear that the inclusion of the veterinary sector in the reforms was unnecessary and would have adverse impact adverse consequences for both industry and the welfare of animals. Firstly, there is no appropriate Australian standard available to cover the medical gas fitting or medical gas technician work that would be done in relation to these premises. As such, licensed practitioners would have no standard to comply with. The standards need to be tailored to the veterinary sector because the needs of humans are naturally different to those of animals. Secondly, the increased requirements will seriously impact the economic viability of the veterinary businesses. The cost of compliance to unnecessarily install piped oxygen will be expensive and may have an unintended consequence of forcing veterinary hospitals to revert to the use of bottled gas. Thirdly, the use of bottled gas will result in a lower standard of care for the animal and comes with increased workplace health and safety risks for humans. There are associated biosecurity risks due to cross-contamination between human and veterinary hospitals by the movement of mechanical and certifying technicians and associated equipment. In the absence of stringent biosecurity protocols, there is potential for movement of species-specific viruses and bacteria between human and animal hospitals, primarily related to people's movement associated with pipeline installation work, inspection and certification. Given these deficiencies, it is appropriate to remove the veterinary sector from the application of the relevant reforms. Another amendment provides that these changes are taken to have commenced on 1 November 2020 to coincide with the existing commencement date of the Gas Legislation Amendment Medical Gas Systems Act 2020. A further amendment clarifies that a medical gas installation is an installation that occurs in a medical facilities, and these are sensible amendments. I acknowledge the work of the Honourable Robert Borzak in recognising these issues and also proposing these amendments to address these issues, and we support the amendments.
Mr Shoebridge.
Mr Deputy President, the Greens support these amendments. We received representations from the peak body of veterinarians in New South Wales, as well as a number of highly qualified experts in the field, particularly on anaesthesia with animals. And we were persuaded by those representations that maintaining the veterinary clinics within the substantive bill would actually deliver harm to animal welfare, because the Australian standards that are picked up in the bill, which are entirely appropriate and in fact essential for proper care of human beings and ensuring that the medical gas that's provided is provided in a safe and secure fashion and won't repeat those appalling tragedies that led to the passage of the bill. Those same Australian standards would be inappropriate for the treatment of most animals in a veterinary clinic. I think I heard the Honourable Robert Borzak indicate that the Australian standard for providing certain concentrations of gas to a human is quite distinct from the what would be appropriate for a Clydesdale. And I think we can all see that as a matter of common sense. Those were matters that I think we didn't have time to fully flesh out when the bill was being passed. And it was passed with a degree of urgency because we needed to ensure that no child would ever see the tragedy that happened to those two children who were the subject, who caused that bill to be passed. But having heard from the veterinarians, having accepted those animal welfare arguments, that it's not the right outcome on animal welfare, we also accepted the economic arguments that overwhelmingly veterinarians only provide oxygen, and that all of these checks and balances in the bill for medical gases more broadly would be a hugely expensive, onerous and unnecessary regime to put in place when the only gas being provided is oxygen. And for those reasons, we initially were proposing that there be a 12-month delay for the implementation for veterinary clinics to allow this matter to be fully explored. Since putting those amendments on, we've had further discussions with the vets, and we've had further discussions with colleagues. We then moved a series of amendments, proposed a series of amendments which indeed parallel what the shooters have put on. But it's not about who jumps first. We will support these amendments because we think they do substantive good.
That's a very mature attitude. The Honourable Mark Buttigieg.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do want to make note of just make thanks to the Honourable Walt Secord, my colleague, for giving me the opportunity to lead for Labor on this. He would normally lead for us. Look, we'll be supporting the amendments of the Shooters, Fishers, Farmers, and along with the sentiments from my colleague, the Honourable David Shoebridge. And I want to thank the government for bringing this to our attention, because it was an oversight initially. Intuitively, you would never have the end use of an installation, whether it's electrical, plumbing, medical, gas, define the qualifications. It's either an installation or it's not. But obviously in this case, because veterinary surgeons don't actually satisfy the definitions contained in the Act, in other words, they are not medical gas installations in veterinary surgeons. That's got nothing to do with how it's described in the Act, because largely the way it was explained to me, and I did speak to some subject matter experts in the industry as well, it's basically an oxygen pipe into those veterinary surgeons, and then they plug a machine into that oxygen pipe, which then delivers a range of medical gases to the animal. And because the way that that's administered does different flow rates and different administration techniques to what the standards specify in this Act, there's no way they could have possibly complied. So the exemption for veterinary surgeons makes sense, and at the end of the day, there's no great danger because it's only oxygen. So even if the oxygen pipes were to be installed effectively, there was a puncture to the oxygen pipe, for example, it's not the end of the world. It is probably something we should look at down the track, because technically, if you're installing an oxygen pipe to a veterinary surgeon, you can do it unqualified, but it's not of a sufficient urgency to deal with it here, and it certainly can't be dealt with in this Act. The other amendment, which we're also supporting, contained in that Shooters amendments, are inserting the words medical facility into the definitions. Means that when you're talking about a medical gas installation, which is defined in the Act, it can only be within medical facilities as defined in the Public Health Act as being a hospital or an aged care facility. So it just ties it back into the Act. So in short, thanks to crossbench colleagues for the discussions and the collegiate approach, and thanks to the government for bringing it to our attention. We'll support the amendments.
The Honourable Robert Borzak has moved Shooters, Fishers and Farmers amendments appearing on sheet C 2020-183B. The question is the amendments be agreed to. All those in favour, please say aye. Those to the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We'll now move on to opposition amendment now, appearing on sheet C 2020-182C. The first amendment has now been superseded by amendment number 1, appearing on the that's now been passed.
No, there is a
Oh,
distinction.
sorry.
There is a Schedule 2A.
Oh, it's different, is it?
Yeah, there is a slight difference.
Well, I'm wrong. It is. There are 2 amendments. The Honourable Mark Butt again.
Can you frame that? You said you're wrong.
Yeah, it's the second time in a fortnight that I've said it. I'm obviously something is going seriously wrong. So.
Mr Deputy President, I move opposition amendments on sheet C 2020-182C numbers 1 and 2.
Is leave granted to move opposition amendments 1 and 2?
Yes.
Leave is granted.
I move amendments 1 and 2 on sheet C 2020-182C. The first amendment, Mr Deputy President, is simply the date that these amendments would take effect, because they're amendments to health legislation which could conceivably be assented to prior to the effective date of the medical gas bill, which is 1 November 2020. It's necessary to move this amendment to make sure that the subsequent amendments apply prior to, on or after 1 November 2020. The other amendment, number 2, subsections 1, 2, 3, and 4, 6, 8, and 5, 7, 9 deal with, 1, 2, 3 deals with, there was a view from the government which we kind of didn't really accept was a problem, but we're prepared to agree to moving this amendment on the basis for abundant clarity, that anaesthesis would get caught up in requiring the qualification, because on a superficial reading of the Act, it could be implied that because they're administering medical gases and therefore getting involved in commissioning and testing, that they might have to be qualified. We don't believe that was the case because the installation was defined as up to the wall. Anything beyond that plug and play didn't fall under the Act. But in order to provide abundant clarity and give those practitioners the comfort of knowing that they didn't have to have the medical gas technician qualification, we've agreed to this amendment, which makes it clear that in the course of their normal duties of testing and administering medical gases, anaesthetists, doctors and nurses won't get caught up in requiring the qualification. The wording's also structured, though, so that they are unable to do the work behind the wall in the situation where, if we were to give them a blanket exemption, it could be implied that the doctor can sort of crawl in behind the wall and start mucking around with medical gas pipes, which we obviously don't want. So that's the outcome of that, that second amendment, subsections 1, 2 and 3. Amendment number 2, subsection 4, 6 and 8 simply deals with some drafting issues in the final bill, which attributed a Cert 3 qualification to be able to supervise and contract, which is obviously not the intent because you would normally have a Cert 4 only do that. So subsections 4, 6 and 8 fix that up so that a Cert 3 is not entitled to supervise or contract but can do the medical gas work. And finally, subsections 5, 7 and 9 of that second amendment, again, as drafted, a Cert 4 would be able to, as previously drafted, a Cert 4 wouldn't have been able to gain a supervisor and a contractor licence. Under the amendments, a Cert 4 will be able to gain supervisory and contracting licence provisions, which was the original intent. So, having said all that, I commend the amendments to the House.
Hear, hear. The Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you. The government supports the amendments to various provisions of the Home Building Act 1989, inserted by the Gas Legislation Amendment, Medical Gas System Act 2020, known as medical gas legislation. The government wishes to make it clear that when Labor proposed amendments to the Gas Legislation Amendment, Medical Gas Systems Bill 2020, concerns about these amendments were raised during consultation, and I note the comments made by the Honourable Buttigieg at the time that the concerns were not necessarily considered. However, the government did end up supporting the amendments during the debate, due to the fact that it was the only means by which the broader reforms could be passed in the Parliament. The first aspects of the amendments currently before us would specifically exclude persons who are registered medical practitioners and registered nurses from the application of uncommenced sections of the Home Building Act 1989, inserted by the Gas Legislation Amendment, Medical Gas Systems Act 2020, medical gas legislation. These include sections 15A, 15B and 15C of the Home Building Act 1989. Without the amendments as proposed, medical practitioners and registered nurses could be inadvertently caught up by the medical gas legislation and then be required to be licensed under the Home Building Act 1989 to carry out functions they provide as part of their profession. Medical practitioners, and in particular anaesthetists and registered nurses, have traditionally played an important part in physically witnessing the testing procedures for medical gas installations in medical facilities as set out in the Australian Standard AS 2896. This involvement, of course, needs to continue. However, this can occur without licensing medical practitioners or nurses. Medical practitioners and registered nurses are already subject to extensive obligations regarding the use of medical gases and would not be required to participate in medical gas installation other than involvement in commissioning and witnessing testing once the installation is almost complete. The proposed amendments to the Home Building Act 1989 allowed medical professionals to get on with their work of helping people and ensure that they are not subject to inappropriate requirements. The testing and oversight actions of medical practitioners and registered nurses will still be governed by the Australian standards and consequently workplace health and safety legislation. However, it would be inappropriate for anaesthetists and registered nurses to have to obtain additional qualifications as plumbers or gas fitters in order to do the oversight and checking role in relation to work which they already adequately oversighted by persons licensed under the medical gas legislation. The second aspect of the amendments involves a number of changes in relation to relevant qualifications. Amendments are proposed to sections 33E, 33F and 33G of the Home Building Act 1989. The amendments will provide that additional qualifications are required for those persons who wish to obtain an endorsed contractor licence or certificate to enable them to do unsupervised work and to supervise the work of others. If the amendments are not made, it would mean that a person would only require Certificate 3 level qualification to be able to work unsupervised or to supervise others, rather than Certificate 4 level qualification, which is a requirement for other specialist occupations under the Home Building Act 1989. And again, the government supports the amendments.
The Honourable Mark Buttigieg has moved opposition amendments 1 and 2 appearing on sheet C 2020-182C. The question is the amendments be agreed to. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those to the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that the bill as amended be agreed to. All those in favour, please say aye. Those to the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you. I move that you do now leave the chair and report the bill to the House with amendments.
The question is that I do now leave the chair and report the bill with amendments. All those in favour, please say aye. Those to the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Animals. We'll do a dance here. Yep, we do. Do a little dance.
The committee reports the bill with amendments.
The committee reports the bill with amendments.
I move that the report be adopted.
The motion is that the report be adopted. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Certificate.
I move that the bill be now read a third time.
That's it. And just timing. I have a certificate from the Chair of Committees that the bill is in accordance to the bill as reported from the Committee of the Whole. The question is the bill now be read a third time. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. You need me to sign something?
Health legislation, miscellaneous amendments bill, third reading.
Thank you.
It's gone.
Yes, on the next one is stronger communities. Clerk will read the order of the day.
Good. The clerk will read the order of the day.